I forget the name of this particular paraphernalia here, right? And they're smoking it. You're very welcome, and it's all about climate funds and how also corruption is bound to be taking over the clammy fingers of corruption when it comes to climate funding. And exam grading, this is what Victor has drawn today in the Daily Nation. And you can see the car hurtling down there, course correcting your car or fixing it as you're moving on. This is what is going on, and recommendations from the Presidential Working Party regarding the grading. We've seen that really coming into effect. Now, they're actually trimming down on the number of subjects that a student is bound to be sitting for. And Professor Kagwanja, I don't know, from the academia, if the way we're trimming down, especially with the grading, that it will be not as competitive as before. I don't know. What has been your assessment?
I think what I said earlier ties in with virtually everything is happening, because you need to look at the policy-making environment and then make a conclusion about the quality of decision-making. Now, what we are witnessing is a very poor quality of decision-making. Even if the decisions are good or they are going to make some changes, the broader context literally is not good. What do I mean? I mean that we are making decisions on the move. Most of these decisions are knee-jerk. We have just come from a reform process of the education, and people have not even settled. So if every speech we made is equal to a new proposition, a new change, then we're going to confuse the nation. Let's start with the culture of politics that we started with. And I want to go back to the 1960s. It was a huge debate, and it culminated in certain documents that guided us through and made us who we are. I'm talking about sessional paper number 10 of 1963, the Kanu Manifesto of that particular time, which basically guided us through the 70s and part of the 80s. So that the changes we did were minimal. What did that make of us? Tanzania has more resources than us, has more population than us, is larger in size than us, is better than us in everything else. Mm-hmm. But we have an economy that is almost twice its size. How did we arrive at that? We arrived at that because we had a very deliberate and concerted decision that were not knee-jerk kind of responses or whims, or what we call with the big English idiosyncrasies. You want just to make a mark and feel that you are recognized, that you made changes. The second, if you look at what we have done under Kibaki, the Kibaki time was perhaps the most turbulent in terms of our politics. It is the time we fought. It is the time we disagreed. But why is it that we see it as a golden moment in our politics? Because it was systematic and deliberate. We started with wealth creation document, written by my professor Anyang Nyong'o and others, and Michael Chege, I must recognize him. They wrote that document, was adopted by the government, and defined us. Then from that, Kibaki came up with the Vision 2030, which defined his own tenor and that of his successor Uhuru Kenyatta, and is going to define William Ruto. But the Kenya Kwanza government need to be thinking about where we are moving, because we have had a series of very systemic attacks on our society, from the locusts of the area. We are talking about longest drought. We are talking about COVID-19. Then we talk about Ukraine. And this is where we are. It has attacked our shilling. It has attacked our economy. Why can't we be systematic as Kenya Kwanza administration and give a clear roadmap for Kenyans take us for the next 7 years? If I may conclude this, the main task of the Kenya Kwanza government is to give us a successor blueprint to Vision 2030, which is going to expire in the next 7 years. We are not even thinking about it. Nobody is even talking about it. We are talking about, shifting elections here and there. Let's be a more deliberate a more systematic nation.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know what it does really portend, just briefly, because this is not really the center of our discussion this morning. It's just a cursory look at the editorial cartoons as well. When we trim down to 2 compulsory subjects, you know, math and then 1 language, either Kiswahili or English, is compulsory. What does it portend for the sciences, where we have seen many people, if it's not really made compulsory, they are greatly shy to pick up these particular subjects, Professor Normi Damba and Dr. Mboge?
Dipal, I've been in the education sector all my life. And I'll tell you for free that the greatest need within the sector is structured and thought through change. Change is wonderful. The world is changing consistently and constantly. The reducing of the compulsory subjects could be a wonderful idea for all of us. But I have a feeling that it needed to be really thought through and understood in the context in which we are and where the world is. We are talking a lot about attracting our kids to the TVETs, which is a wonderful idea. But ask yourself, why haven't the TVETs been as attractive as we want them to be? This is a question goes back to the 60s and trace that history of our educational development to the level where we are, where every parent wants his or her child to get that paper called a degree certificate. So how do we then gradually address that? Because we are talking about the CBC, we are talking about this, there are so many things that we are talking about and planning without corresponding, infrastructural development to back up the system. That is our challenge. The change is wonderful, but I think it needed a little bit deeper thought, particularly with those concerned with the implementation of this on the ground. Junior secondary school, for example, that we already have. It's a good idea, but then look at the implementation. Challenges galore.
Challenges galore. So you think it's too much happening at the same time for the parents? There are a lot of things every which way, policies, being thrown to the parents. CBC, it is a junior secondary school, it is now the trimming of the subjects, it is the university fund. There is a lot happening around there. Yusuf Hassan.
I think the president needs to take a leave from President Kibaki to be deliberate, calculating, and understanding all what is on the table. If you throw too much to the public, they will not remember what happened in the past and now where we are. There's just too much going on. There are too much changes that is taking place. They may be well, but are they clearly thought through? For instance, education is the key to any development. There's not one single country that has developed without education. But when you make changes, for instance, in 2012, I proposed a new budget for higher education, which President Uhuru implemented in 2014, which was to give opportunities to Kenyans to make decisions, whether they want their children to go to private school, private university, or public university. The idea of the bill is a student taking the money and choosing where to go, not giving private university support vis-a-vis against public university. This is practiced in the US, practiced in Canada, practiced in Southeast Asia. And it's an idea whose time has come. That just changed all of a sudden we go back to where we were. And therefore, Obongi will tell you, a faculty member who's teaching one class, okay, teaching is a professor, full-time professor. You're teaching with an old item. There is nothing student learn. They're captured because it was like the way the British set it up. And this is, we're now moving to a creation where students will say, I won't sit in this man's class, I'm moving. Where they say, I will not sit in this institution because it takes 6 years to graduate. I'm going to a private university where it will take me 3 years to graduate and have the content right. Tibet is a very important element. If you look at Germany, look at Italy,
just briefly.
Very important. But let us conceive it and implement it right together with the higher education so that it makes sense.
Thank you. Right. Yusuf Hassan, just briefly, if you have any comment on this particular developments as well.
Well, I think there is a lot of things happening. And to a certain extent, our education system looks messy, indeed, on the ground. Because there wasn't a staggered intervention in introducing these new changes. They just happened suddenly, just almost like our devolution. One day we were a unitary system, and then the next day, bang, we had 47 counties. There was really no process. If you look at Britain, devolution took over 30, 40 years to create Scotland, Wales, and they're now working on developing other parts of England. But here we are, and we have 47 governments, local assemblies and so on. But focusing on the education element, I think that particular issue has been missed because, as has been said, there is a thought process, there is long planning. You can't create an educational curriculum that is effective and implementable through public announcements every day saying you have changed this, you have changed that, tinkering with the system. And you would end up with a very messy situation. But I think there is another problem in this country that I find is also crippling. This degree mania. Everybody wanting a degree, as if a degree was the road to heaven. There's a terrible mistake there because many countries have developed their economies through technical knowledge, through expertise. I take as an example myself. I went to work for the BBC as a broadcaster without a degree. I was trained through an apprentice system where I was an expert in the specific job that I was given. I went to university much later as an adult not to learn a new trade, but to expand my horizons. So I think this idea that everybody must go to a university, and given that our universities are in a crisis because they're not well financed, they're not well managed, many of the public universities are now in a terrible state, both in terms of finance and in terms of leadership qualities. We're not going to get the results that we want to help our country to move forward. And I think there is really a need to rethink what we are going to do as a country to enhance technical education, to make it more attractive, and also to change the mindset of parents who think getting a useless degree would make a difference in the lives of their kids. I employ people with degrees who cannot write a paragraph, who cannot, you cannot give them a solution, problem, and ask them to find a solution. They have no clue. They're just having paper qualifications. And that is not going to take our country forward. The Koreans, the Malaysians, the Thais, you know, the new tigers in Asia and Singapore have put a lot of funding and support into technical education to create the kind of expertise that the country needs for development. We need to do the same.
Right. So are we back to the term that Ronald Dahl came up with, the diploma disease of the 1970s, 1976 there? Did we learn anything from the diploma disease? Because now this is the degree disease that maybe Kenya is suffering from as well. Professor, briefly.
Yes, I think that is where we are, because we are pursuing the wrong things. We are more into the package rather than the content. We are back to Shakespeare, where where we say is that the packaging has become more important than what is being packaged. Now, the truth of the matter is that we had a very, very good education system in the past. But because we have this notion that everybody need to get a degree, we destroyed that system, whereby we had a technical system culminating the technical, what we are calling the technical university today, and we had the academic system, and both were parallel. So I knew I could choose between Thika High and Thika Technical, Nakuru High and Nakuru Technical. But all of them ended up in the same place, the university. By the time you're getting to the university, you have actually made your choice and you know what it is. At that time, the government could plan. And you take a population, what are our necessities, what are our needs as a country? In which areas do we need more technical people? In which area do we need more art people or social science kind of related people, the administrators and so on? In this particular case, we're just parachuting or skydiving with no safety net. Everybody is going to take a degree. They don't even know where they fit into our society. Now, so
shooting in the dark.
Yeah. So in this particular case, parents, and I agree with my student who performed very well, by the way. I agree with Yusuf that parents are actually the problem because they are looking for pursuing prestige. My children are in the university. This, rather than looking at what exactly the country needs. Kenya Kwanza government need to guide the country into a system where we invest in long term, because education is long term. It is not for today. When you make a change today, it will affect generations to come.
Thank you.
So we cannot have this knee-jerk kind of responses.
Right, let's just finish up. I think we do want to discuss matters academic and see there's a flash of interest there, but we can dedicate that for another day. It is just an interest that's developed there from what we can see as an editor cartoon there on the exam grading, and how also the minister, as you can see, is trying to course correct things as it goes on. If we may just have it in full. Then we have also this interesting editorial cartoon there. We are heading to Haiti as the police, and you can see the police is asking there, Afande, how do you say Patia Afande Kitu ya Macho in Haiti, right? If we just have that particular editorial cartoon in full, it will be nice, so that at least we can be able to see. And there has been questions which has been raised regarding the language barrier and also the culture, and do we have the wherewithal to fight the hardcore gangs in Haiti? This is what Stano has drawn. And also, Ozone has been on it as well, looking at Haiti, and on board that particular plane, we can see the two pilots, the captain being now, I don't know who should be the captain, is it Biden or President Ruto in this particular airplane. And we have 14 billion shillings right now that has been stashed away or salted away for this particular mission in Haiti. But let's just begin where also the president was last week, where Ruto met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on the sidelines of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly, UNGA, in New York. Dr. Ruto pledged to support Ukraine during the war crisis following its invasion by Russia. And President Zelenskyy, on his part, thanked Kenya for supporting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. He extended an invitation to Dr. Ruto to visit Ukraine.
Demonstrated a lot of resilience, and we know it's been difficult for the people of Ukraine. Stay strong, and you have our support. As I told you, my brother, we believe in a world order that is based on rules.
All our people, they became in the world. They had to be strong and to hear all the voices. And that's why you have to know that they, and you're right, of course, all of us need it, and it had.
Right, and we just want to buckle down, especially on what does this really portend when we have a support of our country towards now this particular warring faction that has been going on over a year right now, and the president indicating that Kenya is supporting Ukraine. Let's just begin with you, Yusuf Hassan.
Well, I think our foreign policy hasn't changed. We have always supported the international order that exists and is centered around multilateralism in New York at the United Nations. And the president seems to be following on the same steps. But I think I have a bit of a problem with the rule-based international order because it is no longer rule-based. As you can see, there are powerful countries like the United States who have intervened in attacking or occupying smaller, weaker countries. Maximum force has been used to overthrow and change regimes in places like Libya, Iraq, and so on. And the Russian incursion into Ukraine is just an expression of a powerful state which feels it is a national interest. Its international interests are threatened. And I think what the president meeting this particular leader is more a symbolic, really, gesture. I don't think there's anything that we can do for Ukraine other than emphasizing the need for rules-based system in the world. And our position was made very clear at the start of the conflict when our ambassador to the United Nations explicitly made that historic statement on the need for the respect of the territorial integrities, sovereignty of all countries, and emphasizing the fact that we're all equal as nations of the world. So this is a standard policy that we have followed everywhere, and I don't see. But the world is changing. The world doesn't have a single center anymore. There's a major global shift. And I think there is a growing shift to the global south, and more in favor of China, which is the biggest economy now in terms of manufacturing and in terms of growth. The BRICS has recently expanded. And so I think it is important for Kenya to also be cognizant of this major global landscape changes that are taking place right under our nose. And I'm glad that, in fact, the president is not putting all his eggs in one basket. He has slanted very much to the West, but I see that he would be visiting China soon. And I think it is important for us as a country to maintain a non-aligned position and also to look at our own national interest in terms of where we can have more value in global politics. And I think balancing our relationship is very, very important. At this particular junction, there's nothing we can gain from Ukraine. Ukraine is a country at war. We can sympathize with it, which is okay. But at the end of the day, our government and our president, who is actually become our #1 international diplomat, and he's doing a great job in terms of reaching out and selling Kenya outside there, should also be aware of the global power relationship and how it is changing, and we should be part of that change and not be left out.
Right. Peter Kagwanja.
Well, I think I will start with a statement that I think I prefer a predictable enemy than an unpredictable friend. And that dictum applies to nations. Nations become trusted because you can predict their actions. If they say we are rule-based, then they follow that. That's very clear. And what is at stake now is not that Kenya is deviating very much from its foundational philosophy of intervening, that guiding it in international relations, pragmatism and all that. I think what is really happening is that we're now seeing to be more guided by our desire to appease and be at at home with America, particularly the Joe Biden America, because you don't know how the Trump America will deal with us when it comes to power. And in America, it's only 4 years, and you have a new leader, and then changes the whole dynamics of things. We look to be working more to please America than to serve our own interests. And if you go back to, and why we as a nation are beginning to have a problem in the way we are perceived in the world, is because in the 1960s, 60s and 70s, some of our elite literally wanted to please Britain, and therefore we went to bed with appetite. And that gave us a bad name, and we recovered only during the the Kibaki period, when at least we tried to make peace with South Africa and say that let's forget the past and make the future. But it left a bad name with us compared to Tanzania. Then we decided to basically be guided by our national interest. And therefore Pan-Africanism, which we claim, which is basically the only ideology we can cling to ourselves, and which saved us when we needed Africans to win the United Nations security seat. It is Pan-Africanism that enabled us to do that. It's about positive neutrality. And positive neutrality has nothing to do with not making decisions. You make your decision, but your decisions are guided by your national interest and the continental interest. That's it. If Africa is benefiting, we are benefiting. If that is benefiting us, that's what we do. Now, punching above our weight in places like Ukraine is not advisable. But at the same time, going to Haiti for a humanitarian mission, it's not bad. I think that makes a lot of sense. But then the question is, we are going to Haiti and Sudan is burning. Then there's a question of relevance. Why would Kenya not be empowered to basically do its neighborhood, and which we can do? So again, it's about our national interest. And our international interests are not American or Chinese or European interests. Our interests are African interests. And at this juncture, I think we are really veering away. And sooner or later, in this world, and this world is not a Cold War world. This is very anarchic. It is being described as very anarchic world order. We are going to find ourselves either being hewers of wood or drawers of water for major powers, or at best, flower girls.
So in terms of perception, what does it really portend for our country globally?
Well, again, my colleagues have mentioned some very fundamental things that we need to listen to right now. I'm teaching 55 students from 15 countries in Africa. And the most important thing we need to focus on is our own national interest. How is our own national interest going to be served? Duval, if you have two devils, you have to deal with the devil that you know in all cases and in all times. I support the president coming out right now and supporting Ukraine. And I'll tell you why. The world has to have a rule-based. It doesn't matter because Obongi did something different from me, and therefore I repeat the same thing. We have to have consistency in terms of our international relations and projecting our interests. I can just say that the highest ranking commander of the Black Sea is dead. And this is the second time an admiral has been killed in the war since the Second World War. So the issue is, who is going to win Ukraine-Russian war? Russia is in the most precarious place. It is very possible that Ukraine will win the war. Ukraine is producing a lot of wheat. We need food basket in Kenya. And we need relationship with the West, which is our traditional ally. What I'm saying, if you look at their per capita income, if you look at the industrial output, is way more than what China will be able to produce. And then look at the debt that within a very short time that we have accumulated with China. Is China going to forgive? Very unlikely. And therefore, what we need is a new realignment with the West, new realistic and realignment. We need manufacturing instead of US aid, such that we can up our industry, we can sell our goods, we can move to the middle class. And America did that to Japan. America did that to Southeast Asian countries. They're doing it in Vietnam. They're doing it to Mexico. They have the capacity. And the relationship that we create with America and Europe right now is very critical. But it needs to be realistic based on our national interest.
But haven't we been in this relationship for the longest time as well? It is not a relationship we are creating or cementing. It has been there for the longest time. So what new relationship are you really
What
talking
new
about?
relationship, Dubal, is instead of aid, instead of their coming in and out, instead of their talking about the risk.
So reconfiguring the terms of relations, there is what you're talking about.
Completely change relationship, create manufacture. We need Walmart to be manufacturing in Kenya. We need EV cars to be manufactured in Kenya, including the engine, not just assembly line. And that will change. We need the US to consider carbon payment, investment on energy, particular nuclear power station that can be able to power our system. This can happen, and they can support it. But so this is what is happening. I'm really not support of this Haiti movement of taking hundreds of hours.
We'll come to Haiti. Let's just deal with the meeting first of all. Let's hear from Dr. Obongi.
Well, I agree with my colleagues' very brilliant ideas about Kenya's foreign policy. But I will hasten Dibal to add that, yes, this very romanticized notion of us supporting Ukraine because we are a product of very strong efforts of self-determination. We have said before, we are the land of Mau Mau, and a country that fights for its right to exist as a country. It has the right to do so. But for me, that is as far as it goes. In an international system that is very predatory, in an international system that is very anarchic. And you reminded me of Kenneth Waltz and his analysis of the anarchic international system. What is happening in Ukraine is not just a fight between Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine is really a theater of clashing international interests in a world that is increasingly moving from what we call unipolar, dominated by one superpower called the United States, to a multipolar world where there are multiple players who will determine patterns of how nations relate. If that analysis is true, then as a tiny little country in the global south, we need to proceed with a little bit of caution. We need to proceed with a little bit of caution. Because the emerging scenario in the international system is not necessarily going to be dominated by one power. America is trying very hard to Americanize really many things around, which is wonderful. They're following their national interests. But what is in there for us as a country in a multipolar world in a world dominated by the BRICS are coming up. China is very strong. The West, the fortunes are increasingly declining around the world. So what is in there for us? I said in the beginning of this discussion that it seems to me that we are getting into the second scramble and partition of Africa. How does our leaning to whichever side that we are leaning to help us to withstand the effects of international interests on Africa? And where does that leave us? I think we need to ask ourselves very hard questions instead of taking near dogmatic stances of supporting this side versus the other one.
Mm-hmm. All right, so where does the principle of non-alignment really becomes applicable? Because I think across Africa, even when people were taking veto to, to either be seeking or supporting the war in Ukraine or not, we saw some African countries, including Ethiopia, restraining as well. In that particular gesture, does it also brings the aspect of the support and non-support, even through the vote? Where do we apply this principle of a non-alignment when it comes to such a war and a country as Kenya?
No, I think in the case of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, I think what as a country we should be doing is to play a positive role, which is to stop the war, to fight and make sure that in fact this conflict is resolved through peaceful engagement. And the majority of the African countries are doing that. For example, recently the President of South Africa led a delegation of African leaders to engage with both parties. And I think that is the constructive thing, because there's no victory in this war. I mean, Ukraine has been degraded. It is fighting a superpower. I don't agree with the professor's perception that Ukraine has any possibility of winning this war. It can win the peace by maybe having a political settlement with Russia. But certainly this is a destructive, damaging war for Ukraine, and it will take them maybe over 100 years to recover from it. It's a small population, it's a small economy, even though it is a major grain producer. There's no possibility of Ukraine selling a lot of grains to us and Mombasa becoming a major hub unless this conflict is stopped. And so I think non-aligned means allied to your interest and working with like-minded countries. It started with the Bandung Conference of 1955 when key members from Africa, Asia met to really give a rationale, give a space to Africa and Asia and the developing world to have a voice at the international stage. And I think that is what we have been struggling for, to have a say in this global system that is in existence. We have been bystanders, spectators. And what is happening in Africa is there's a change. Africa is demanding its place in this World Forum. Africa wants to be represented in the United Nations, particularly the Security Council, where we're not represented, where major decisions on peace and security are determined by a small group of political actors, global actors. And I think that is happening. And Africa now has a much stronger voice and agency in international affairs. We are no longer the same old Africa where a lot of things were decided for us and we kept silence. And our president is at the forefront of that. For example, on climate change, I think. He's taken a very strong, decisive position of amplifying our voice on the global stage, and he's been listened to. So non-alignment means you're not going to be a pawn in global affairs. You're going to take a position, and a position that enhances the global south, countries of the south, speaking with one voice. And you know, numbers matter. And to have that power to be able to speak and determine change in our global affairs. That is what it means. And it is growing now with BRICS. They had 5 or 6 members.
Yes.
They recently expanded to become one of the biggest blocks in terms of GDP. And I think that movement is going on. To think that actually Africa is still an agency or a country that has been acted upon is really simplifying. It's a simple thinking, because we have passed that stage. And I think if you look at the issue of Haiti, Kenya has always contributed to peacekeeping efforts in the world. I don't know why it has suddenly become a controversial issue. We have been in Timor, we have been in Kosovo, we have been in Namibia. We have served in international peacekeeping as part of the global attempt to stabilize our world. And yeah, Haiti might be out there. But why does anyone think that because we want to help in the situation in Haiti, we are going to be seen as a puppet or as an agent of the United States? Why doesn't people in Kenya believe in our agency, in the fact that we are an independent state, we can make our own decisions, and we can contribute to peace and stability in the world on our own terms, helping a small country with a population of people of African descent? So there are complexities, of course, and I can understand the situation. But Haiti is a small island. It has a failed state.
Thank you.
And it's our responsibility. It's responsibility to actually act and help.
Right. We'll come to it very robustly. But we just want to list comments or the meeting with Zelenskyy in its entirety so that we can listen in, and then we wind up with you also, Professor Kagwanja. We go to Haiti and also the meeting also that we had the Minister of Defense here meeting with the U.S. Defense Minister as well. Let's just listen into that particular conversation.
One in person,
yes,
but we had a conversation before.
I remember.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Our people, I am telling you, you are a very special. Congratulations for you have demonstrated a lot of resilience, and we know it's been difficult for the people of Ukraine. Stay strong, and you have our support. As I told you, my brother, we believe in a world order that is based on rules. And the delegation from our continent, where they came to make a visit to you, move on with all the things that we have to do. Thank you very much for getting a few moments.
Thank you. Please pass message to First Lady. Thank you for that participating with your team to come any available time and to come to Kiev, and you will hear and see attitude to your country and to you. We see you and all our people, they became in the world. They had to be strong and to hear all the voices. And that's why you have to know that and you're right, of course, all of us need it. And of course, in Denmark, then in Jeddah, in Saudi Arabia, and now we are preparing the so advanced.
Indeed. So, Professor Kagwanja, as we're winding up on that, variegated views that we do have of this particular meetings, or this particular meeting and the foreign policy leaning on one side towards now the West as opposed to the East, and people also talking about the Pan-Africanist that Ruto has become so far. It is not really auguring well with some Pan-Africanists as well. They think, as we've heard, that it's becoming a pawn in the game of chess. Just briefly, as we're winding up on this, how critical is this perception?
I think let me make the point that there will always be conflicts, there will always be wars in the world, whether they're in the East or they're in the West, or they're between the East and the West, between the North and the South. Wars will be there. What is important is the decision that a country makes in terms of what it wants to become globally. We have one living example of Switzerland, which made a decision of what kind of global politics they are going to play, because emanating from a clear understanding of who we are. I consider Kenya what you'd call a frontier state. And we need to do an analysis of who we are so that when we make certain decisions, we don't fragment ourselves internally or we don't fragment our soul. First, look at us. We have a huge chunk of the Cushitic population from the north, both Ethiopia and Kenya. We have a huge population of Nilotic population from South Sudan and southern Ethiopia. And we have a huge population of Bantu stock from stretching to Tanzania. There is no other country in Africa that has that kind of a conference. It resembles Switzerland, for example, which has the Germanic speakers, the French speakers, the Italian speakers, and all. And that's why Switzerland decided on what they call a policy of neutrality. Mm-hmm. Neutrality does not mean not taking positions on global issues, but it is simply ensuring that you don't take positions that fragment your own population or sentiments within your own population. Here in Africa, people don't support what Russia did by invading Ukraine. They think that Russia should have taken another position. They sympathize with Russia insofar as the NATO invasion of the Russian territory, as it were, endangering its interests were concerned. Mm-hmm. So we're sympathetic, but of course, they would not support the measure of war. So the urgent agenda here is to end the war and address the issues that possibly led to the war and then normalize the situation. It is not about taking sides. Mm-hmm. Or saying, I'll support you, or I'll not support you. Or we sympathize with you, or we don't sympathize with you. It's about taking a principled, neutral position that seeks to end the war and to normalize order in the world. That's what I would call positive neutrality. Yes, we need grain from Ukraine. We need oil from Russia. We need, diplomatic relations with Russia. We need good relations with Ukraine, and they support us. So the point is, Kenya's future is not in taking hardline position in support of certain functions. It is in aligning our interests and also staying true to the Pan-African policy of positive neutrality. Positive neutrality is what is our inheritance in foreign relations.
So is that a Pan-African policy,
yes.
Positive neutrality?
It was agreed in 1945 in Manchester. It was drafted down by George Padmore and Jomo Kenyatta and Kwame Nkrumah. They were the drafters. And they talked about positive neutrality, which is basically the African version of a non-alignment. So it did not mean that Kenya cannot do business with America. That's not what it means. If our interests are there, it did not mean that Ghana cannot have business with China. No. It is simply saying that you are guided by your interest and the Pan-African interest. That's it.
Right. Noah seems to be having a different view.
Yeah, no, I don't have a different. I really concur with what Professor Kagwanja is saying.
But from your statement,
there is one thing I'd like to correct from Honorable Hassan. I didn't mean Ukraine is going to defeat Russia. That is not possible. What I mean is Russia will never win the war because of European American interest. And therefore, it's going to be the same like Vietnam. America invaded a small country in Vietnam. They never won. They had to withdraw. And so you have to rethink about that. And I like what Professor Kagwanja is saying. It comes down to our interests. Where does our interest lie? Our interest lies within the East African region, within the African region. We are getting absorbed with huge debt, whether it's IMF or whether it's Chinese law. Why can't we have this money channeled through African Development Bank? And then African Development Bank will loan us money at the lowest interest possible and then be able to pay off that money and give us a long-term payment period like 30 years. Why can't that happen? So then we can develop. It can happen right now with the US pushing that And BRICS doing that. Is BRICS going to do it? I have very serious doubt right now. So let's not jump from one fire to another, think the world is going to be okay.
Right.
And I like the idea of positive neutrality. It doesn't mean we stand isolated, but we are constantly engaging, but projecting our best national interest.
Mm-hmm. But you are in the support, earlier you indicated you're in support of what the president is actually posturing with the Ukraine.
Completely.
You're in support. Okay.
Yeah, completely.
Oh, you wanted to add something? Come here.
There are two configurations in the world now. One is the old Western focused, Western-run, Western-led international system, which has, since the Second World War, been involved in many conflicts, in destabilizing African countries, in destabilizing Middle Eastern countries, fighting unfairly for the resources of those countries, removing regimes. And then we have another configuration, which is the global south that is coming up. And BRICS is one of the good examples. The philosophy of those countries, the African Union, the Asian countries, is to have a more fairer, more balanced, more equitable global order and less conflicts, living peacefully together with the rest of the world. And I think that is where our interest lies as a country. It doesn't lie with countries that are going to the expansion of NATO, for example, is what has triggered the conflict in Ukraine. The expansion into other territories, the domination of other countries, that is no longer possible. What we want is a much more balanced, a much more fairer and equitable society and system, a more orderly and just global system, the reform of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, representation of Asian, Latin American and African people at the decision-making process. And what BRICS is doing is creating alternative institutions, financial institutions, political institutions that are giving voice to this alternative. Mm-hmm. And I think we should be part of that. We shouldn't be part of the old system. There is nothing for us there. The second thing is this debt issue that we're talking about. Let's also be fair about that. Much of our debt, 70 to 80%, is to the West, to the Western institutions, to IMF, World Bank, and vulture capitalists. Mm-hmm. We're borrowing at an incredibly impossible rates that we cannot pay back. Mm-hmm. Our China debt is less than 28%, less than 30%. Mm-hmm. And much of that debt has gone into infrastructure development. So where is our interest? Our interest is based on create a different world order in which Africa is no longer going to be enslaved, where we're going to be exploited and our resources are going to be taken by multinational country and multinational corporations at a throwaway price. And when you refuse, you're going to be overthrown or destabilized. That's what